This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. When I was a kid growing up in the 80s, one of the stories that dominated the latter half of that decade, both in America and the rest of the world, was the AIDS crisis. It was and remains a terrible disease, and back in the 80s, the word AIDS came with so much baggage that stemmed from fear, confusion, and let's be honest here, homophobia, that President Ronald Reagan very famously didn't utter the word until 1986. People were dying, and society at large was focused not on the tragedy of the victims, but on the lifestyle of the victims, because then they could justify that homophobia. Anyway, this isn't a social justice episode or even an episode about the AIDS crisis. The reason I bring it up is because there's a crazy Campfire story that was repurposed sometime in the late 80s that served to scare the shit out of adults living their lives instead of kids sitting around a campfire. It goes like this. A man meets a woman in a singles bar in New York. They're both young and attractive, single, and looking to meet. They hit it off and spend the next few hours drinking and dancing until finally the guy makes a move and invites the woman back to his apartment. These two consenting adults keep the party going and have a passionate one-night stand. The next morning, the man wakes up alone. There's no trace of the beautiful woman he spent the night with. He asks himself, was this all a dream? He did have a lot to drink, but no, of course it happened. Still though, you'd think she might have stuck around for morning coffee, but nothing, not even her phone number. After fully waking up, getting himself a glass of water, he heads into the bathroom to brush his teeth. And it's then, at that very moment, that he realizes his life has changed forever. Scrawled across the mirror is the proof of his encounter, a goodbye note from his erstwhile lover, written in the bright red lipstick that was still smeared on his face and neck. Welcome to the wonderful world of AIDS. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to Campfire Stories, Part 3. Someone out there has to remember that story from their childhood. I was 10 or 11 when I heard it. I remember I was at Giant Stadium and my parents were talking to some other adults we went to the game with, and someone told my dad the story, and it terrified me. It made me think that AIDS was super easy to get and that there were incredibly evil people in the world. Well, I was half right. Over the next decade, my generation, Gen X, was sufficiently educated both on the nature of the disease and how to protect ourselves from it. And today, 40 years later, society has a completely different understanding of HIV and AIDS and treatments that basically amount to a cure. But a simple story like that has the ability to affect an entire generation in good and bad ways. The bad was the misinformation relayed in the story that made it seem like having sex with a stranger was an instant death sentence. The good was the lesson that evil exists, and it could take the form of a beautiful woman as easily as a ghoulish fiend. But what was the original? What inspired that story? Well, it came from a little campfire tale called Don't Turn On the Light. The most popular version of the story has two sorority sisters, roommates, that go to school in Boston. Their names are Rebecca and Danielle, and one Friday night, they decide to hit the clubs in downtown Boston, just a few blocks from the sorority house where they live. It's near the end of the semester, so most of the house is also going out for the evening. Once arrived at the club, Danielle realizes that she left her purse, along with her ID, back in the room. Danielle tells Rebecca, go inside the club, have fun, and that she'll be back as soon as she can. Rebecca goes into the club as Danielle races home to get her purse. She arrives at the sorority house, runs up the stairs to the second floor, opens the door to the room she shares with Rebecca, and races into the kitchen where her purse is sitting on the counter. She doesn't even turn on the lights. She knew exactly where she left it, and she also knows the layout of the room so well that she was able to easily navigate her way in the dark. Then she hustles back to the club, finds Rebecca, and dances the night away. After a few hours, Rebecca, who was there longer than Danielle, decides to head home. Danielle wants to stay, so she says goodnight to her roommate, and Rebecca heads home. The lights come up in the club at 2 a.m. It's time to go home, but as Danielle arrives in front of her sorority house, something is terribly wrong. Cop cars, ambulances, crime scene tape, detectives taking statements from other sisters. Danielle runs up to the first cop she sees and asks, "What happened? Is Rebecca okay?" She explains that she's Rebecca's roommate and wants to be let into her room. She's told, "Well, ma'am, that's not a good idea, because Rebecca was murdered earlier that evening, in her room." It's pretty bad. She's told that she really doesn't want to see what happened in there. Danielle insists and is finally allowed access as long as she's with a police escort. As Danielle enters the room, it's not the blood that grabs her attention, or the violence of the crime scene. It's not her friend Rebecca getting zipped up into a body bag. Instead, all Danielle can focus on is a message smeared in her friend's blood across the living room wall. "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" Okay, so this goes back to the basics. Being afraid of the dark. Why? Because you literally can't see if there's danger lurking in that darkness, and given the chance, our brains will come up with all sorts of terrifying shit. And for good reason. It's evolution. It keeps us alive. It's a survival instinct, and it can come out of nowhere. You know, that sudden adrenaline spike that sends you bounding up the basement stairs with your ass tucked way in just in case a demon is trying to grab you at the last second. Come on, we've all been there. So this next story isn't about our built-in fear of the dark. Instead, it's about an equally strong and nearly as prevalent fear. Clowns. That's right. Coulrophobia, or fear of clowns, is a pretty well-researched phenomenon that's present mostly in children, but affects a startling number of adults as well. As with most phobias, coulrophobia severity decreases with age, but is still among the top 10 phobias out there, with more than 5% of adults claiming to be extremely afraid of clowns. That's a higher extremely afraid percentage than heights, small spaces, and flying. So yeah, fear of clowns is a real thing. But why? The answers are pretty interesting. Mostly, it's the makeup. In fact, it's almost entirely the makeup. And again, with good reason when you think about it. As humans, we're subconsciously trained to detect emotional cues from our fellow humans. Those cues primarily come from facial expressions, smiles or frowns, furrowed brows, subtle changes in the eyes. With a clown, all of that information is camouflaged. Instinctively, that's a warning sign for our brains. And about that camouflage, the makeup a clown wears, in general, dehumanizes the person's appearance. Our minds know that we're looking at a human, but it doesn't look right. In fact, it looks dead. The pale skin, the bright blotches of bright red, they look like a corpse in a funeral home. At least they share the color palette of a dead person, and our brains pick up on that and really don't like it that much. Plus, the painted-on, exaggerated facial features convey an instant feeling of a threat. I mean, who walks around with a crazy permanent smile and artificially wide-open eyes? A crazy person who wants to kill you, that's who. So fear of clowns isn't completely irrational, although phobias, by definition, have a degree of irrationality baked in. Coulrophobia is at least commensurate in its irrationality with the other big phobias. Do all clowns want to kill you? Of course not. Believe it or not, I've known some professional clowns in my time, and they're lovely, creative, professional, family-oriented people. But then there's John Wayne Gacy, the Stephen King book It, every version of the Joker character, along with hundreds more unsettling depictions of clowns in popular media, and, well, you can kind of understand how we got here. This next story is about how our waking, rational mind can play tricks on us as well. It's called the clown statue. A few years back, a teenage girl was working as a babysitter for the families in her town who had young children. Obviously, this wasn't unique. Who among us didn't have a teenage babysitter when we were kids? The job requirements were simple. Don't burn the house down, make sure the kids are safe, and don't invite your boyfriend over. For Jessica, it was an easy way to make a few bucks for her trips to Sephora and Starbucks, and maybe even save a little to buy a car in a few years. The Lewis family lived 3 blocks over and had 2 kids, ages 5 and 3. She'd sat for them before. The kids were easy and would be in bed by 7:30 at the latest. Read a few pages from the Warrior Cat series of books, and boom, they'd be out. Then she'd be able to binge a few episodes of the new season of Ted Lasso and get paid while she did it. The only request from the Lewises was that she watch television in their bedroom instead of downstairs. They wanted her to be near the kids' room in case they woke up. No problem. The kids went down even easier than she had hoped, and she was relaxing in the comfy bed with a can of Pepsi and a bag of Doritos by 8 p.m. The only thing that freaked her out a little bit was the clown statue in the corner of the room. Clowns in general didn't scare her, but this thing was life-size. Obviously fake, it was posed holding some tchotchke that the Lewises picked up on their last trip to Las Vegas, and it had that grotesque, exaggerated smile, oversized shoes, and that classic red ball for a nose. The weird thing was that, occasionally, over the next 2 hours of Ted Lasso, Jessica's attention was caught, out of her peripheral, of some movement coming from the clown statue. Could that be real? She laughed it off. Her mind was obviously playing tricks on her, but still, the thing seemed like it moved, at least 3 times. Not big movements, but enough to get her attention. So she stared at the statue for a long time, at least a minute straight, waiting, searching for any signs of movement. But nothing. Gosh, of course not. It was a statue, and she was alone in the house, and clowns are weird, and well, of course, it wasn't moving. She went downstairs to grab another Pepsi from the fridge, and when she came back into the room, she stopped dead in her tracks. The statue was still there, right where she left it, but she could swear that the Las Vegas tchotchke was now in the clown's other hand. Could that be? I mean, come on. The answer, she knew, was no way. She must be remembering it wrong, even though she stared at the thing forever, studying it for movement like a lunatic. But she could swear the thing was holding the object in its left hand, and now it was clearly in its right hand. Okay, she thought, enough is enough. This statue had clearly gotten into her head, and she decided that, look, the kids are asleep, they're safe in their beds. I mean, it would be fine for her to wait downstairs for the Lewises to come home. She'd keep the TV volume low just in case one of the kids woke up. Really, nothing was going to happen. And besides, it was a little extra, she thought, to make her watch TV in the upstairs bedroom. And really, the clown statue had officially become just too creepy to deal with. Less than 5 minutes later, as she was happily settled into the couch in front of the much larger living room television, her cell phone rang. It was Mr. Lewis calling from the restaurant. They were about to order dessert, and he just wanted to check in on things, back at the ranch, as he liked to say. "All good here, Mr. Lewis," Jessica replied. But Jessica was an honest kid, and she felt a little guilty about not following the instructions to stay in the bedroom. So, as good kids do, she came clean. "I gotta tell you, Mr. Lewis, I wasn't comfortable staying in your bedroom to watch TV." Mr. Lewis was a bit confused by this admission. What do you mean, Jessica? Is there a problem?" Well, she said, to be honest, that clown statue in the corner has me really freaked out. My mind was playing tricks on me because I thought I saw it move a few times out of the corner of my eye. Maybe I'm just scared of clowns and didn't know it. Suddenly, Mr. Lewis's entire demeanor changed. Jessica, he said, go upstairs right now and get the kids out of the house. Right now. I'm calling the police and we'll be there as soon as we can. Jessica, instantly terrified, responded with, wait, what? I don't understand. What's going on? Mr. Lewis shouted, we don't have a clown statue in our bedroom. Thanks for listening. More Campfire stories in the next episode. Please make sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also follow our socials at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Till next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is a Cloud 10 Media production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan. Executive produced by Sim Sarna. Our post-production supervisor is Bruce Whitkin, who also provided original music for this episode. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.